Hello, and welcome to Align, Engage, Fulfilled. I'm your host, Clarence Moore. And if you don't know, I'm an alignment coach and consultant, and I've spent this entire season asking one question from every possible angle. What does it actually take for a human being to engage with their work? Not show up, not perform, but engage. Now, if you've been with us in season one, you know that this show is built on a simple but powerful premise, one that's rooted in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But there is a critical distinction that's worth making. In Maslow's original hierarchy, there isn't a strict linear progression. A person can be operating at any level of needs in any order at any time. But my translation of Maslow into the work context argues something more specific. In the workplace, the progression is largely linear. Alignment comes first. Before you can engage with your work, you have to be aligned with it. Before you can find fulfillment, you have to be engaged. The progression isn't accidental, it's by design. Aligned, engaged, fulfilled. In that order, for a reason. Season one was about alignment, the foundation. We explored what it means to be in the right place, doing the right work, in an environment that actually fits who you are. And what we found is that most people aren't. Most workplaces weren't designed with alignment in mind. This season, we turn to engagement, and I want to be honest with you about what that meant and what it didn't mean. We didn't solve engagement, but we started to explore it. We looked at it through the lens of leadership, compensation, psychological safety, culture, the employee experience, modern systems, language, hiring practices, purpose, and equity. And while those conversations gave us real insight, they also made clear how much territory still remains. Engagement is vast. And in this entropy economy, as Matt Pepsel calls it, the forces that are pulling us apart are relentless and multiplying. There just are angles that we haven't touched, dimensions that we haven't explored, and conversations that we haven't had yet. And we plan to continue that exploration because this isn't a problem that gets solved in one season. What the season did do is build upon a case that we started last season. And every single conversation kept surfacing the same uncomfortable truth. The conditions for engagement are systematically absent in most workplaces. And most of us have been sensing it without being able to name it. As I've mentioned several times on this podcast, Gallup's annual State of the Global Workplace report is my Bible, because it names and quantifies this problem every year. And today, for the first time with this level of depth, I want to talk about how it connects to everything we've discussed this season, to offer a perspective outside the report itself. It was released about a month ago, and I've been saving it for this finale. Because this report isn't just data. It's the empirical backdrop against which everything this season has been arguing comes into focus. It confirms what our guests have been describing from the inside. It puts numbers to the feelings, and it raises a question that I think is the most important one that we can ask right now. If we know this much about what's broken, why are we still moving in the wrong direction? Just like our season finale last season, this is going to be a solo episode. No guest, just me, the data, and the alignment lens that I want to bring to it. Because the report tells you what's happening, but I want to help you understand why and what it means if you're someone living inside these numbers. Let's get into it. All right, so before I get into the findings, I want to give you a quick picture of what this report actually is, because the credibility of the source matters, and I don't want you to just take my word for it. So, the Gallup State of the Global Workplace Report is the largest ongoing study of the employee experience in the world. Almost every year since 2009, they survey workers across more than 100 countries, asking about engagement, well being, daily emotions, job market perceptions. It's a comprehensive picture of how people actually feel about their work and their lives. This isn't a self selected HR industry survey. This is rigorous, longitudinal, and global data. So when a trend shows up here, it means something. The 2026 report covers data collected in 2025. And when you put it next to last year's report, a very clear and honestly troubling story emerges. One thing that I noticed immediately is that this report, 2026, is about 100 page longer than last year's. And you can tell it very clearly if you just put it side by side. And the content justifies it. There's new data on AI adoption, job displacement anxiety, and the emotional experience of leadership that wasn't in the 2025 report. So it's a significantly deeper look. Last year's report was about understanding employees and informing leaders. This year, it's about the human side of the AI revolution. And I think that that framing is doing something really important because while AI is consuming every headline, the progression of this report from 2025 to 2026 is asking a harder question. What happens to the humans inside the organizations deploying it? That's an alignment question, and it runs through every finding in this report. So that's the lens. 100 plus countries, longitudinal data, the largest ongoing study of the employee experience in the world. With that context, let's start with the number that matters most, and the one that, when I first read it, made me stop and sit with it for a minute. In 2025, global employee engagement fell to 20%, down from 21% the year before, and down from the peak of 23% in 2022. Now, I know what you might be thinking. A couple of percentage points doesn't sound like much, but here's why it is. Each percentage point represents approximately 21 million employees globally. A 3 point drop from its peak means roughly 60 million people are disengaged compared to 3 years ago. That's a population the size of Italy quietly withdrawing from their work. And this is the part that stopped me when I read it. This is the first time in Gallup's entire tracking history that global engagement has fallen for 2 consecutive years. Not during the 2008 financial crisis, though it is important to note that they didn't collect data in 2010 and 2011, which may have suggested otherwise, but not even during or immediately after COVID. The cost that Gallup estimates is approximately $10 trillion in lost productivity. That's 9% of global GDP. And I want to be transparent with you because that's a modeled figure, not a directly measured one. So treat it as directional. But even if you discount it significantly, we're talking about an almost incomprehensible amount of unrealized human potential sitting idle inside organizations worldwide. Now, here's the alignment translation, and this is the frame that I want you to hold for everything else in this episode. Engagement isn't a mood, it's not a personality trait, it's not something that you either have or don't have. Engagement, as I've been arguing, is the output of alignment between a person, their work, their team, and the environment that they're operating in. When those things are in sync, people engage naturally. When they're out of sync, disengagement isn't a choice, but a signal. So when global engagement declines for 2 consecutive years, when no region in the world improves, what that's actually telling us is that the conditions for alignment are systematically absent, not just in the US, but at a global scale. That's not a motivation problem because it's hard to accept that the entire world is unmotivated. That's a structural misalignment problem. And those are solved very differently. And I want to be specific about what those conditions actually require because alignment doesn't start with culture or leadership or purpose. It starts at the base of the pyramid. In Maslow's hierarchy, physiological and safety needs come first: food, shelter, security, stability. In the workplace, that translates to compensation. If a person is worried about whether their paycheck covers their rent, whether their benefits protect their family, whether their financial foundation is stable enough to stop thinking about survival, they can engage. Full stop. You cannot skip that layer. Vicky Shepard and I talked about broken compensation structures and the trust that they destroy before engagement ever has a chance to form. Gallup's data doesn't isolate compensation as a standalone variable, but my framework does. And I'd argue that some meaningful portion of those 60 million disengaged workers are people whose physiological and safety needs are simply not being met. They're not disengaged because they don't care, they're disengaged because the foundation was never built. Now, this season, Matt Pepsel introduced us to entropy, the invisible forces that are pulling alignment apart from the inside faster than organizations can regenerate it. I go back to his episode often because he put language to what we're experiencing in the macro sense. And this data is what that entropy looks like at scale. 60 million more people disengaged from their work in 3 years. That is not a coincidence. That's a system doing exactly what a misaligned system does. So that's the engagement picture. It's global, 2 consecutive years of decline, 60 million more people disengaged than there were 3 years ago. But data without explanation is just an alarm going off in an empty room. So let's talk about why. Because Gallup's data points to a very specific answer, and it's the finding that I keep coming back to as the centerpiece of this entire report. For years, Gallup's data consistently showed that managers were more engaged at work than the people that they led. There was what Gallup calls an engagement premium, a gap that made intuitive sense. More autonomy, more influence, more connection to the direction of the organization, managers were in. But that premium is gone. Since 2022, manager engagement has dropped 9 points from 31% to 22%. The single largest year over year drop happened this past year, 5 points in 12 months. Individual contributors, by contrast, have largely held steady and actually shown a slight rebound. Although I question that based on what I continue to hear from people on social media and through my conversations. But the gap that used to exist between individual contributor and manager has closed. Managers are no longer more engaged than the people they lead. Think about what that means structurally. 70% of team engagement is attributable to the manager. That's not a guess. It's replicated across Gallup's meta-analyses over decades. When the manager is disengaged, the team follows. When that cascades downward, so does productivity, retention, customer relationships, and financial performance. And the sharpest declines are among the people least equipped to absorb them. Young managers under 35 are down 5 points, and female managers are down 7 points. These are people who stepped into leadership during or after the pandemic, inherited restructured teams, shrinking budgets, and entirely new employee expectations. And they largely did it without support. Less than half of the world's managers, about 44%, say they've received any management training at all. And here's the alignment read on this, and I want you to really sit with it. Managers said yes to leadership because of what it represented: influence, growth, impact, the ability to actually shape something. That's the version of the role they signed up for. What they got was accountability for everything with authority over nothing, impossible demands from executives above, and unmet needs from employees below. A role that keeps expanding while the resources to fill it keep contracting, and no development to help them navigate any of it. That's identity misalignment. When the role you're in stops matching the person you understood yourself to be, when the job description and the lived reality are fundamentally different things, disengagement manifests, and it's a signal that something is structurally wrong. And here's what makes this particularly important from an alignment perspective. A manager who is misaligned cannot create the conditions for their team to be aligned. Misalignment doesn't stay at the level where it starts. It flows downward and across. It reproduces itself in every one-on-one, every team meeting, every performance conversation. The manager who's burned out and disconnected from purpose isn't withholding engagement from their team on purpose. They simply don't have it to give. And we talked about this all season, from the leadership crisis that doctors John and Lisa Gates named at the very start, to the generational complexity that Linda Harvey and I unpacked, to the systems failures that Casey Devine described. The manager is the choke point, and this data proves it. The 2025 report named this problem, but the 2026 report confirms that it has accelerated. And the honest read is that most organizations who saw last year's data nodded, but they changed nothing. So that's the manager's story. Engagement premium is gone, 9-point drop since 2022, and the people least supported in the role hit hardest. Now, I want to move to the part of this report that is genuinely new ground and where I think the alignment lens becomes the most clarifying. Because the 2026 report goes somewhere that the 2025 report didn't. It goes directly into AI, and it asks a question that almost nobody in the mainstream conversation is asking. If AI is so transformative, why aren't we seeing it in the outcomes? The letter from Gallup's CEO, John Clifton, opens with a striking set of numbers. An MIT study found that despite roughly $40 billion in enterprise AI investment, 95% of organizations have seen zero measurable impact on profits. A survey from the National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER, of nearly 6,000 global executives found 89% report no impact on labor productivity in the past 3 years. Individually, workers do report gains. In the US, 65% of employees in AI implementing organizations say that it had a positive impact on their personal productivity. So individual users are getting value, but it's not translating to organizational outcomes. Gallup's explanation points to, as many things do, managers. The strongest predictor of AI adoption after technical integration is whether the direct manager actively champions it. Employees who strongly agree their manager supports their team's use of AI are dramatically more likely to say that it's transformed how work gets done. Yet less than a third of US employees in AI implementing organizations say that their manager does this. In Germany, it's 21%. So here's my alignment translation, and I think this is one of the clearest examples of organizational misalignment that you'll find anywhere in this data. Organizations are investing at the tool level while ignoring the conditions underneath. They're solving for capability when the actual gap is connection. And no AI system, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how well integrated, bridges a human disconnection. Think about what you're actually asking. You're asking a burned out manager who is more disengaged than they've been in years, who never received training for their actual job, to now champion an entirely new technology to a team that also doesn't feel seen or supported. And you're measuring the ROI on the technology when the real variable is the human alignment beneath it. That's not an AI problem. That's a misalignment problem being blamed on a tool. Earlier this season, Linda Harvey and I talked about exactly this, about deploying AI to a multi-generational team through a manager who was already at capacity. The Gallup data confirms what she said, that you cannot hand a disengaged manager a transformative technology and expect a transformed outcome. You have to fix the human conditions first. But I want to offer a counterpoint here because the report doesn't fully reckon with this. There's a reasonable argument that the productivity paradox is partly a lag problem. Technology historically takes years, sometimes decades, to show up in macroeconomic data. So we may simply be too early. But that doesn't make the engagement crisis any less urgent. If anything, it makes it more so because the engagement crisis comes with its own lag effect with repercussions beyond what we can currently comprehend. And there's no data that shows which lag effect carries more positive or negative influence on the future of work. But based on what we know today, I believe that the organizations that will capture AI's gains when the tide turns are going to be the ones with aligned workforces and capable managers when it happens. Right now, most organizations are moving in the wrong direction on both. There's also a dimension the report raises that almost nobody is discussing: active disengagement, Gallup's term for employees who are actively working against the aims of the organization, doesn't just fail to adopt new tools, it can actually sabotage them. The security and the integrity risks of deploying powerful AI systems into a workforce where some percentage is actively disengaged is a conversation that has barely started but has massive implications. That's the AI paradox: individual gains, organizational silence, and a manager bottleneck that not enough people are talking about. Now, I want to zoom into a finding that's more specific, more regional, and for a lot of people listening, probably more personal. Because the job market data, particularly here in the US, tells a story that I think names something a lot of high achievers are living through right now without quite having language for it. Globally, job market confidence improved slightly in 2025, up 1 point to 52% of employees saying it's a good time to find a job. But again, I would challenge that based on what I hear on the ground from people on social media. And I think it's important to recognize that the people who are voicing their frustrations on social media may not be as inclined to participate in Gallup's survey. And that gap matters. That said, based on this report, that's a modest positive. But the regional picture is far more uneven. The US and Canada dropped 10 points in a single year, from 57% to 47%, second to last globally. And when you zoom out, since 2019, the US and Canada have fallen 23 points in job market confidence, from 70% to 47%. Gallup describes the 2025 US labor market as quote unquote no hire, no fire. And the numbers back it up. The US added 181,000 jobs in 2025, but the year before, 1.5 million. Now, here's the alignment translation, and this one is personal for a lot of people listening. Suspension is where misalignment does its quietest, most expensive damage. Not in the dramatic exit, not in the visible breakdown, but in the slow erosion of someone who is still showing up, but stopped arriving. Still producing, but disconnected from the why. Still employed, but no longer invested. The high achiever in a frozen market isn't suffering in an obvious way. They're functioning, they're meeting expectations, but they're paying a cost that doesn't show up on a paycheck. The accumulated weight of being in the wrong place with nowhere to go. That's the price of misalignment. And in a no hire, no fire climate, it compounds quietly over months and years. Earlier this season, Katie Toro and I talked about a hiring system that creates misalignment before the employee ever starts. A fiction matching exercise, as we called it, that puts the wrong person in the wrong role and then wonders why engagement never materializes. The frozen job market is what happens on the other side of that failure. People stuck in misaligned roles with no clear path out. The system that failed to get alignment right at the beginning is now holding people in place. There's also a notable split by work location in this data. Fully remote workers saw a 5 point drop in job market optimism. Workers in remote capable on site roles saw a 14 point drop. The report suggests this may reflect a contraction in remote job availability as return to office policies tighten and as AI begins automating knowledge work roles that were historically remote friendly. And this year, for the first time, Gallup is directly tracking AI related job displacement anxiety. 18% of all US employees say it's very or somewhat likely that their job will be eliminated in the next 5 years due to AI or automation. In organizations where AI has already been implemented, it's 23%. In finance, insurance, and technology, 31 to 32%. Now, this is early data, just 1 year. We don't know yet whether those fears will prove accurate. But here's what we do know: uncertainty about whether your role will exist is itself a misalignment accelerant. It makes it nearly impossible to commit fully to work that might not need you in 5 years. And if nearly a quarter of workers in AI implementing organizations feel that way, the engagement numbers start to make a different kind of sense. But that's the job market picture: frozen, anxious, and quietly expensive for the people suspended inside it. I want to close the data portion of this episode with the well being findings because there's a signal here that I think is genuinely underreported. And there's one specific finding that I want to sit with you in for a moment because it speaks directly to the person this show is made for. After 3 consecutive years of decline, global employee thriving ticked up 1 point in 2025 from 33% to 34%. Half of the world's regions improved. Latin America and Europe both gained 2 points. That's a reversal, however modest. But the full picture requires honesty. Negative daily emotions, such as stress, anger, sadness, loneliness, remain above pre pandemic baselines. Stress is at 40% globally. Anger is at 22%. These numbers have declined from pandemic peaks, but haven't returned to where they were before 2020. The 2026 report raises the question explicitly: are these lasting impacts from the pandemic era or a new, more difficult baseline that we're simply adjusting to? That question hasn't been answered yet, but it's worth holding. Now, here's a finding that I think is genuinely underreported and that lands squarely in alignment territory. When Gallup compared senior leaders, managers, and individual contributors on both well being and daily emotional experience, they found something that should be uncomfortable for anyone in a leadership role. Leaders rate their overall lives more highly than individual contributors. By external measures, title, income, influence, status, they're succeeding. But day to day, leaders experience substantially more stress than those they lead: more anger, more sadness, more loneliness. Senior leaders are 7 points more likely to report daily stress, 12 points more likely to report anger, 11 points more for sadness, and 10 points more for loneliness. Yes, leadership gives people a voice, it gives them agency, and it gives them status. But it comes with the price of significant social distance that often requires them to consciously misalign. Painful decisions that affect many people's lives, a particular kind of isolation that doesn't show up in the headline well-being number. So here's my alignment translation, and this one is for the high achievers specifically. This is the misalignment pattern I work with most often. By every external measure, things look right: the title, the income, the life evaluation score, success on paper. But the daily lived experiences tells a completely different story. Lonelier, heavier, more emotional weight than anyone around you realizes or at times empathizes with. That gap between how life looks and how it feels is the price of misalignment. And it's almost never visible from the outside, which is exactly why it persists. The reflective achiever doesn't talk about it easily because they're too busy succeeding. This season, Jody Scott named it from a founder's perspective: this ripple effect of a leader's internal state into the culture, into the team, and even into the home. What Gallup is showing us here is that it's not just a personal story, it's a global pattern. And that's important for us to recognize. Leaders are lonelier, heavier, and more emotionally burdened than the data suggests. And that burden flows downstream, whether they intend to or not. Kevin Hubschman actually made an argument that felt counterintuitive at first, but landed with more weight the more that I sat with it. That laughter isn't a luxury in the workplace, it's a leadership tool. That when leaders check their humanity at the door in the name of professionalism, they don't just lose the room, they lose the people in it. And more importantly, they lose something in themselves. What Gallup is confirming is that the emotional cost of leadership is real, measurable, and consequential. Kevin's argument wasn't just about levity, it was about the human connection that keeps leaders from becoming isolated by the very authority that they've been given. Gallup does find one buffer. When managers and leaders are engaged, they report all those negative emotions at significantly lower rates. Engagement acts as a protection against the emotional weight of the job, which means that the path forward for leaders isn't just about performance metrics. It's about creating the alignment conditions that make engagement possible in the first place. So that's the well-being data. And I want to take everything we've just walked through and hold it together for a moment, because I think there's a through line running beneath all of it that the report itself doesn't fully name. So here's where I land after sitting with both of these reports together, the 2025 report and the 2026 report. And after a full season of conversations that I now realize we're building toward exactly this moment. We started this season with a crisis of connection. And what the Gallup data confirms is that the crisis isn't abstract, it's measurable, it's global, and it's accelerating. Manager engagement down 9 points since 2022, 60 million more disengaged workers than there were 3 years ago, a $40 billion AI investment producing near zero measurable organizational impact, a job market so frozen that people are staying in roles they've already left in their minds, leaders succeeding on paper and paying for it in private. The through line, the thing that connects every single finding in this report and every conversation this season, is misalignment. Managers misaligned from the role they thought they were stepping into. Employees misaligned from the work that connects to anything they care about. Organizations investing in tools while misaligned with the human conditions underneath. High achievers succeeding by every external measure while quietly paying a cost nobody sees. And deeply systemic barriers, like the absence of equity, as Celeste Warren shared, making the conditions for alignment unavailable to some people before they ever get the chance to engage. None of this is inevitable. Gallup is clear about that. Best practice organizations, the ones that treat management as a discipline, that build engagement into the strategy rather than measuring it as an HR metric, that create the actual conditions for alignment, have 79% manager engagement. Not 22%, 79. The gap between 22% and 79% isn't just some small talent gap that can be fixed by hiring more managers or paying them more. It's a more nuanced decision gap. It's the difference between organizations that understand what creates alignment and those that just hope that engagement shows up on its own. That's the read I'm taking from this season. And if this episode this season named something you've been sensing but couldn't quite say, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments, send me a message, or send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because the reflective achiever doesn't just sit with this kind of insight. They do something with it. And that's what we need right now, action. If you feel like you're disengaging from your work, or if you're a leader and you're sensing your team disengaging, go take my alignment assessment. The link will be in the show notes. It's the place to start if you want to understand where misalignment is showing up in your work or in your organization. And if you want to know what to do about it, schedule a consultation with me and I'll be happy to help. Season 3 is coming in August and we're going somewhere we haven't been before. Fulfillment. What it actually means to find it in your work and what it costs when you can't. I want to thank you for joining me again this season, and I'll see you again in August. In the meantime, please help us reach more reflective achievers by sharing the podcast and engaging with us on social media. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Clarence Moore. This is Align, Engage, Fulfilled, and I'll see you soon.